from the big town in New York City. Not so fast in that lane that's Avenue of the Americas right now.
Right now, though,
maybe 3-4 miles
Fifth Avenue right now, not so fast because the president is here and the traffic is
1 block over. That's absolutely
Plus
right.
the protesters. I will say, though, the weather could not be better in New York City right now. We got
It's
pretty
raining.
lucky
Yeah,
this summer.
what are you talking about?
But it's cool.
Well,
maybe it's just being pregnant. I'm like, it's nice out.
there you go. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us on this very busy Tuesday. And we start with a Fox News alert. Maybe, as it turns out, Fire and Fury and Locked and Loaded work, because it has been announced by North Korea state media that Kim Jong-un has backed down from the nuclear showdown with President Trump. And in fact, it sounds like he's decided he's dropping his plans to try to bomb the vicinity of Guam.
That's right.
That's what it's sounding like, at least. This is the most recent quote from the leader there, from Kim Jong-un. He says, if the Yankees persist in their extremely dangerous and reckless actions against the Korean Peninsula and its vicinity, testing the self-restraint of the DPRK, the North will make an important decision, as it has already declared. Already it seems to be backing off from its more forceful language.
I love being referred to as a Yankee as well. Like, it's good old-fashioned propaganda. Those Yankees, if they try something...
I thought he was talking about the baseball team.
No, he was talking about you. He was talking about you. Yeah, the North Korean state media went on to report that Kim made his decision not to fire on Guam after visiting a military command post and examining a military plan presented to him by his senior officers. They probably said, sir, if you do that, we're all going to die.
Pretty much, because they said, we listened to the Defense Secretary, James Mattis.
That's right.
And he said this about what would happen if North Korea were to fire a missile in the direction of an American.
If they fire at the United States, it could escalate into war very quickly. Yes, that's called war, if they shoot at it. If they do that, then it's game on.
Game on.
Game on. I'm telling you, from the beginning, it's all been about credible threat of military force. So when the left and the media scream bellicose rhetoric, lock and load, fire and fury, no, that translates just how it needs to the North Korean regime. This doesn't mean it's over at all, but this is a huge step back from a regime that prides itself on pushing the envelope and thumbing its nose. This is a big win. Now you got to get to denuclearizing and a real dismantling of the regime. But count this as a victory.
I mean, this is the toughest talk we have heard yet when it comes to talking directly to North Korea and to China. So something has happened in the last 24, 48 hours with their rhetoric to be pulled back like that. I do wonder if China has played a role at all behind the scenes with North Korea, because as we know, the president has been pretty tough on them in the last 24 hours too.
Absolutely, because the president of the United States yesterday essentially said, hey, China, we're coming after you for copyright infringement and theft of intellectual property, and China doesn't like that, so maybe something's going on behind the scenes. We know that in public over the last week or so, the president has used some very harsh rhetoric, but on this Tuesday morning, perhaps the verdict is it worked.
Yeah, it does. And it does. Tough talk can work when backed up by real action. To your point, Abby, there's been a lot of reports about conversations with the Chinese, putting the screws to them where it really hurts. And if they came to the table alongside this rhetoric, that's the kind of combination that makes it happen.
Yep.
We will see where this continues to go. It's not over yet.
It's not. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice ramping up its investigation into the Charlottesville, Virginia attack as the suspect remains behind bars without bail.
Now, the Charlottesville police chief is setting the record straight, saying that his officers were not told to stand down.
Our own Ellison Barber is live in Charlottesville, Virginia with more. Good morning, Ellison.
Good morning to all of you. Charlottesville Police Chief Al Thomas is pushing back against criticisms of what many people here say was an inadequate response to violence that began long before a car came barreling down this street, injuring 19 and killing 1. Thomas is denying rumors that his officers were given any type of direction to stand down. Take a listen.
You or the mayor or anyone on the mayor's staff instruct law enforcement not to make arrests unless approved by the mayor?
No, and I'd like to know who that officer is who allegedly made those remarks. That is simply not true.
A judge denied bail for James Fields, at least until he meets with his court-appointed lawyer. Fields made his first court appearance yesterday. He did it from behind bars, speaking to the judge through a video monitor, wearing a gray and white jumpsuit. The 20-year-old is charged with second-degree murder. He could face federal charges as well. The DOJ opened a civil rights investigation into this incident. Sources familiar with the investigation tell Fox News investigators are trying to see if Fields had any help in planning this attack. According to reports in the Washington Post late yesterday, in the Washington Post and TMZ, Fields' mother called police back in Ohio at least twice to report her son for threatening or violent behavior. At one point in 2010, she reportedly called police to say that her son had hit her in the head and tried to cover her mouth after she told him to stop playing video games. Back to you guys.
All right, Elsa Barber live in Charlottesville. We thank you very much.
Thanks, Elsa.
The chief was asked yesterday, did he have any regrets about how they handled things? And he said, well, we lost 3 people. You know, we lost 1 civilian and we lost 2 fellow officers. So obviously they... Plus, essentially what they said is, in looking back, the big problem was they did have a plan for this protest, but the protesters did not follow the plan. They started marching 2 hours before the plan was supposed to go into effect, and then they were going to keep people apart.
Right.
It didn't work.
Remember, most of these people came in from out of town. A lot of them were not locally from Charlottesville. So,
yeah, and having
very
been,
organized.
having covered and been in the middle of things like these, they take on their own life. And if you're in a life of their own, with crowds moving and confrontations happening here, and if you're not ahead of it completely, it can get away from you.
Well, speaking of crowds and New York City now, President Trump is back for the first time, actually, since winning the nomination as President of the United States. You can see there protests really going on throughout the day yesterday. It was busy here in the city. If you were anywhere near Midtown, you probably wanted to leave.
Absolutely. Before the president returned home, though, he did say some more things about what happened in Charlottesville over the weekend. Many wanted him to say more. He did say the right things. He cited the groups by name. He called violence repugnant and racist. He said racism is evil, and he said anybody who broke the law will be held fully accountable.
Yeah, if you heard this speech, it was quite a powerful one. It was actually an unexpected statement. We didn't know that he was going to come out about 12:30 is when it happened yesterday. He used a teleprompter. It was obviously well thought through. You know, his team, I'm sure, helped him put it together, but it was something that many people felt he had to do, and I think it was the right thing to do. It was some strong words about us loving each other, coming together, being one as an American. We should all be treated equal, and he did. He did point out these groups specifically, the neo-Nazis, the KKK, the white supremacist group. People are now saying, look, this is too little too late. But I say, you know what, at what point do we move on and say, what's best for this country?
Oh, don't worry, not enough for the fake news media, not enough for everybody else. Any other channel you're on right now is saying, it was too late, fresh uproar. Why didn't he name him on day one? When you come out and immediately condemn, and then you put out a statement, and then the next day you say, again, in person, on teleprompter, exactly, here's these groups. How many times do you have to say it? And you can't win for losing, no matter what. And the amount of attention that's put on him, as opposed to, say, the 20-year-old Nazi, you know, human being that mowed people over.
He is a terrorist.
Of course, whatever you want to call him. But now this is President Trump's fault? He's to blame? You watch those mobs, and that's all those signs say. It's unhinged.
Well, I tell you what, I was listening on the radio yesterday, driving around, and Rush Limbaugh was talking about what's going on, and this is his observation about what is going on.
No matter what Trump said today, this is just the latest, most recent story that propels the get rid of Trump effort. And this will replace the Russian story and the Mueller investigation for a while, and perhaps a big while, because this, identity politics, this is it. This is what the Democrat Party has become. This is how they hope to win again and triumph. So this is going to be milked for all it's worth.
So there's Rush saying this is the most recent story that propels the get rid of Trump effort.
But you look back on the past 3 days since this story broke on Saturday afternoon, the focus has been President Trump. And we lose sight so often as a society when we start talking about these horrific events that happens. It's pointing fingers, it's pointing the blame, it's all about racism and who is to blame for that when we don't focus on exactly what happened and the innocent lives that were lost. How do we lose focus so quickly? I think a lot of people are frustrated
because you got a media focused on one thing, which is Trump hating.
Yeah.
I mean, truly. And you look at the signs outside Trump Tower yesterday, they're all about how President Trump is a racist. You know what those signs are saying? They're saying you, Trump supporter, you're a racist. I think you're a racist if you voted for him because you want a wall, because you want law and order, and you support the cops. You want to call it radical Islamic terrorists. You're a racist. You're a bad person. That's the logical extent of where the left will want to go with this, and it's really unfortunate because it doesn't talk and focus on the real things.
What matters most, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk a bit more on this topic with Star Parker in a moment, but right now we turn to Jillian, who's got the headline.
Hey, Jillian.
Good rainy Tuesday morning here in New York City.
I'm loving it, Jillian.
But Abby's loving the weather. Let's get right to a Fox News alert. A 13-year-old girl is killed and her little brother is fighting for his life after a driver intentionally rams into a pizzeria. The attack happening outside Paris. French police believe the driver was high on drugs and possibly suicidal, but not motivated by terror. He is alive and under arrest. A dozen people now recovering from injuries. New overnight, Iran's newly re-elected president now threatening to quit the nuclear deal within hours if the United States continues to impose any more sanctions. Hassan Rouhani issuing the warning in a televised speech. Meantime, an Iranian drone flies dangerously close to a Navy aircraft for the second time this month. A drone getting within 1,000 feet of a plane flying off the USS Nimitz in the Persian Gulf, creating a dangerous situation. Today, Alabama voters will decide which Republican will run for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' vacant Senate seat. Conflicting polls show incumbent Senator Luther Strange and former Judge Roy Moore leading the pack. Strange was appointed to fill Sessions' vacancy in February and is endorsed by President Trump. We will talk to Senator Strange live in the next hour, but first we will hear from our own Todd Pyro talking to voters at a diner in Alabama, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Let's look at your headlines as I send it back to you guys.
Yeah, I actually was in a diner recently in Mobile, Alabama. It's a great state.
I've never been there.
Yeah, it's
I should go.
Yeah, Alabama is a great place.
Right now. See you guys.
We'll get you a one-way ticket, but we want you to come back. We'll get you a round trip.
Thanks, Jillian. All right, coming up, Hillary Clinton's pastor made news for comparing her election loss to the death of Jesus Christ. This morning, he is back in the headlines for stealing, apparently. We've got more on that coming up.
That's not in the Bible. And what did former President Obama know, and when did he know it? A new shocking report about Russian meddling in the election. Stick around.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
There's the president in the White House yesterday, once again condemning the violence in Charlottesville on Saturday, this time naming some of the hate groups involved. But that apparently not good enough for some on the political left. Here to discuss is Star Parker, founder and president of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, joins us from our nation's capital. Star, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's start at the beginning. Did you think that the president's comments on Saturday, the day of this particular event, were too vague and not appropriate?
No, actually, I thought they were very appropriate and on point. The point at that point was that the alt-right and the alt-left met in an American city over a very local issue. It escalated into a riot very quickly, and he needed to calm it down before it spread across the country. No, he was exactly on point. There is an alt-right and there is a alt-left, and this war between the two sides has been going on for an awful long time.
You're describing a culture war, Star.
It is a culture war. And when you think about it, David Duke, he thinks that the president is dog whistling him that we're going to go back to the Confederacy is just as wrong as the hard left that thinks that this country is not about traditions, limited government, open and free markets, and e pluribus unum, many becoming one, not the multiculturalism and diversity that they keep promoting. No, there is a cultural war, and it is escalating, and so Americans must rally around the fact that we do not want to end up in a civil war.
Right.
We battle in the voting booth. We battled in the voting booth last November. The alt-left lost, and they are pretty upset about it.
The president sent out a couple of tweets yesterday. Here is one of them. Made additional remarks on Charlottesville and realized once again that the fake news media will never be satisfied. Truly bad people. What do you think about that?
I think that there is an alt-left media as well, and its challenge for us is to sort through which is legitimate media, even if they're center-left and they're mainstream. When you think about the alt, it is the extreme of both sides. And yes, he is not getting a fair play with the alt-left, because what he was trying to address on Saturday is very different than whether he agrees with people or people group or individuals that voted for him or not. The president did not decide who gets to vote for him. The only place that the president can speak into who does not get to vote is when that voter is illegal, not when it is a legal vote cast. So this left-wing media that has a narrative that they're going to do any and everything to disrupt this presidency, it has to be confronted, and that's what he is doing.
What do you think about Nancy Pelosi, who made this statement yesterday? It shouldn't take the President of the United States 2 days to summon the basic decency to condemn murder and violence by Nazis and white supremacists.
That is not what happened. Nancy Pelosi is exploiting an opportunity that they think will play to their side. On Saturday, there were two sides that were in an American city and it was escalating very rapidly. No, the question became then, well, do you denounce the one part of it? But you know what's really interesting and a really incredible irony here is the same people that are demanding that the Confederate flag comes down are the same people that are insisting that the rainbow flag goes up. These two flags represent the exact same thing, that certain people groups are not welcome here. So if Nancy Pelosi wants to say that we're going to start shutting down First Amendment rights of a certain group of people, then what happens the next time that the homosexuals want to walk through an American city and protest and counter-protesters come out?
All right. Star Parker joining us today from Washington, D.C. Star, thank you very much. What do you think about that? Email us, friends@foxnews.com, about her commentary. Meanwhile, Tim Tebow does it again, going beyond baseball to create a special moment with one very special fan. The patriotic moment you don't want to miss, straight ahead. And Hillary Clinton's pastor once made headlines for comparing her loss to the death of Jesus Christ. This morning, the pastor's troubles just got worse. Oh, my. All right, 6:24 here in New York City. Time for some quick headlines. In just a couple of hours, the Congressional Budget Office will release a report on the effects of President Trump cutting off Obamacare insurer payments. It's expected to include projections of how the move would affect the federal budget, stability of exchanges and premiums, and the number of people with no health care. President Trump said he'd consider the measure to help broker a repeal deal in Congress. And more medical care for veterans. New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu signing an executive order allowing VA doctors to practice at facilities outside of VA hospitals. It comes after serious problems at the Manchester VA Medical Center that interrupted a number of veterans' care. All right, Abby, Pete?
All right, thank you, Steve. Well, the morning after Hillary Clinton lost the presidential election, she received an email from her longtime pastor. It was a message of reassurance and hope.
But it turns out the message wasn't entirely his own. Shalady plagiarized the writings of another pastor and got busted after including the post-election email in his new book called Strong for a Moment Like This.
Here to react is CBN chief political correspondent and host of CBN's Faith Nation, David Brody. David, good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks, Pete.
So what's going on here? This is Hillary Clinton's pastor, wrote a book about things that he would email her during the campaign. She then wrote the foreword to this book, and now it's come out that he's plagiarized a lot of this.
Right, and one of the big topics, or at least subjects at the beginning of the book, is the one that's in question. So it's right off the get-go, and I think that's what kind of even makes it even more interesting. And isn't it interesting, folks, that the foreword written by Hillary Clinton, remember, she was asked to write forewords for a lot of different books. No, she turned them all down. She said, you know what, I'm going to go with this book, and we have now headlines, Hillary Clinton's pastor plagiarized. Not a good headline.
I will say, though, she probably didn't know. Sure. At the time when she was writing that foreword that her pastor had been plagiarizing this. So she can't really be to blame for this situation.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. But I will say this. I think what's very important here is that, look, I mean, talk about bad luck. She runs against Donald Trump. You think it's a slam dunk. It's not. And then we have this situation where the only book she writes the foreword to, this happens. And then there's deception involved in this. And the last thing she needs out there is any sort of deception storyline.
Sure. Well, we've got an excerpt that was plagiarized. We'll put on the screen here. It says, for the disciples and Christ followers in the first century, Good Friday represented the day that everything fell apart, all was lost. The momentum and hope of a man claiming to be the Son of God, the Messiah, who was supposed to change everything, had been executed. Great message. Also, we've talked on this program about how a reference to Good Friday was emailed to her after the election, comparing sort of her loss to the death of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, unfortunately, one thing that was left out was Bad Wednesday, which was the morning after for Hillary. But look, it is a good message, and it's something that evangelicals talk about all the time. Obviously, there's valleys and peaks, and, when there's a valley, the peak's on the rise. So that's all great. Problem is, yeah, there was a plagiarism issue. But apparently the pastors have made up, so that's that, I guess.
Well, David, after the horrific events on Saturday in Charlottesville, as it always happens, people are pointing fingers, wanting to blame certain groups of people for what happened. And now you have some journalists that are blaming white Christians for these violent attacks. This is a headline from the Daily Beast. It says, time for all Christians to denounce white supremacy. The Washington Post says this after Charlottesville. Will white pastors finally take racism seriously? And finally, The Atlantic, how will the church reckon with Charlottesville? What's going on here?
Well, look, a couple of things. First of all, most evangelical leaders, if not all of them, I say all of them, obviously in air quotes, but most of all denounced it, first of all. And true biblical Christianity has nothing to do with white supremacy. It's a lazy narrative by the mainstream media, no doubt about it. Remember, remember in the Bible, even in Matthew, Jesus talked about how he won't even know people that call themselves Christians. In other words, people that are claiming to be Christians doesn't mean that you are a Christian, and that's very important. These white supremacists like to claim Christianity. Well, they can be shown the door. They have nothing to do with true biblical Christianity.
Yeah, well, why are they trying to make that link then? Why rush to say, well, it's the pastors or churches that are to blame for this or should be apologizing for it?
Well, look, I think the fix is in, if you will, against evangelical Christians, white evangelical Christians in this country. And here's what I mean by that. If you're a white evangelical Christian who voted for Donald Trump and who may have some problems with affirmative action policies in this country and want to crack down on illegal immigration, what, all of a sudden you're part of this grand narrative that you're either a racist or a bigot? I mean, give me a break. I mean, the whole thing is preposterous, and it's time that the church and evangelical leaders really speak out more forcefully about this.
Yeah, you got to be so careful in lumping groups of people together. David Brody, good to have you.
David, thank you very much. Great stuff.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Well, he was sent to death row for murdering his pregnant wife. But now Scott Peterson says he wasn't the last one to see Laci alive.
Ooh. And voters in Alabama gearing up for a special election to fill Jeff Sessions' empty Senate seat. How are they feeling this morning? Our own Todd Byro is live at a diner having breakfast with friends.
He's missing right now. We'll find him. But first, happy birthday to Kerry Walsh Jennings. The volleyball Olympian is 39 years old today. Enjoy 39. Next one's a big one.
I feel so close to you right
now. We are back on the Kirby Couch mezzanine level, Studio F.
Having a dance party,
Friends.
Yeah.
It's Tuesday, why not? Time now for a little news.
Yeah. Over to Julian for some headlines this morning. Hey, Julian.
Good Tuesday morning. Let's get you caught up on what you need to know before you leave the house this morning. A death row phone call is shedding new light on the murder of Laci Peterson. Her husband and convicted killer, Scott Peterson, claims he wasn't the last person to see her on Christmas Eve in 2002. The phone call, part of a new A&E docuseries called The Murder of Laci Peterson. Scott Peterson sentenced to death in her murder. He is appealing. California now filing 2 new immigration lawsuits against the Trump administration. The state's attorney general and San Francisco's city attorney challenging the president's plan to hold back money to sanctuary jurisdictions. Officials calling it unconstitutional. Nearly $28 million is at stake. The Obama administration may have been warned of possible Russian election interference more than 3 years ago. According to Politico, intelligence officials found Russian devices placed on U.S. and European voting machines in 2014. The officials claim their reports were brushed away because the administration didn't want to anger Russia. They don't say if the 2016 election was affected. Tim Tebow hitting a home run before he even stepped up to the plate. He joined a fan with cerebral palsy as she sang God Bless America. The heartwarming moment moment happening during the 7th inning stretch of the Tampa Yankees and Port St. Lucie Mets game on Saturday. The fan is part of a group of special needs adults that performs in the area. Her mother says Tebow was, quote, just wonderful.
Oh, I love these stories. And how brave to be able to sing in front of that crowd.
I couldn't do it. And he turned 30 yesterday, so happy belated, Tim.
Happy birthday. Yeah, we wished him happy birthday on the show yesterday.
I was not there for that, so happy belated, Tim.
Pretty sure he...
Janice, we've been talking about the weather. It feels it's wet, but it feels nice and cool this morning.
Oh, it's because you're pregnant.
I'm the only one that
I
likes
remember
it.
those days. Any coolness that comes my way when I'm pregnant, I loved it. So, yes, we have some drizzly weather here in New York City. It has thankfully stopped. We're seeing a peak of sunshine, but we are going to see the potential for some showers across the Northeast. Let's take a look at the maps, shall we? I will show you where it is cooler than average across the Great Lakes and the upper Midwest, as well as the Northeast, warmer than average for the southern states. The radar will show you the potential for showers, thunderstorms, even some severe storms later on this afternoon and this evening for the upper Midwest, the Central Plains from Texas all the way up towards Wisconsin. The potential for large hail, damaging winds, isolated tornadoes. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. And then we have, I believe, Hurricane Gert. Hurricane Gert, our second hurricane of the season. It is offshore. My husband is very excited because the surf is going to be high over the next 24 hours. Though I think he might take the day off today and go surfing. But don't tell anybody. Hurry back inside.
That's what I would do.
Whoever told you whispering on TV was a good idea when you had big news?
Really, it doesn't work. Oh, no, I might be in trouble.
Keep trying it. Tell us more.
We love you, Janice. Thank you.
Be safe if you're going to the beach because the rip currents are going to be high as
There
well.
you go.
Yeah.
Janice Dean, the weather whisperer.
Yeah.
A new title.
All right.
All right. Well, the polls are now open in Alabama for today's big special election.
So what are voters there saying this morning? Let's check in with Todd Pyro. He's talking with folks at Jim's Restaurant in Prattville, Alabama about the new senator. Who's it going to be, Todd?
Hey, Todd.
Yeah, that's the question, guys. It's a big day here in Prattville, throughout the entire state of Alabama. And pundits are really saying it's going to come down to three people. The incumbent Luther Strange, Mo Brooks, congressman from this area, and Roy Moore, a former judge. So we're talking to the people about who they want in there. We're going to start with Walt. First of all, Walt, retired Air Force. Walt, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
And you, I'm guessing, Trump supporter?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, good.
All the way.
I wasn't clear based upon the outfit. And you say you are voting for Luther Strange. Why?
Well, I'm really not crazy about any of the candidates, but President Trump endorsed Luther Strange, and Luther Strange, I've heard him say that he would back Trump's agenda, and that's what I'm looking for, is for a candidate to back his agenda.
Specifically, the issue that gets you fired up is immigration. You want the wall built. Explain.
Right. I want the wall built, and Trump, he fired me up by saying that in his rallies. I went to one of his rallies in Madison, Alabama, and he fired me up along with thousands of other people in this country.
Understood. I'm going to go to Kendall now. Kendall, you have an interesting job. You are a leadership coach. Let me ask you, what do you think about the leadership in Washington, D.C.?
I don't think there is any leadership in Washington, D.C. Teamwork is necessary, and basically we have everybody fighting. It's not unified. They're not supporting the president. We have all three branches of government. They should all be accomplishing a lot. They haven't accomplished much.
Now, a lot of the polls that are currently out there have Roy Moore leading, but you say, I'm not a Moore fan, I'm a Luther Strange fan. Why?
I'm supporting him because Trump endorsed him, and I think Moore's a little bit too conservative for me. I think he'd bring a lot of more fighting, and when there's enough of that going on.
Understood. Okay, now we're going to get a different perspective. Scott is here visiting us, visiting Alabama, I should say, from Florida. First, explain to the viewers at home why you are here. I find it fascinating.
I'm working at a fountain, I'm a fountain contractor out of Orlando, Florida. And we're building, downtown is the Memorial for Peace and Justice, and we're building a 160-foot water wall, which we call like a weeping wall.
Okay.
And Doster Construction is the construction company we're working for.
So peace and justice, something we need now more than ever.
Peace and justice, especially right downtown, and it's a very fascinating project, and I'm really kind of glad I'm part of it.
So as an outsider to Alabama, he says, I'm voting for Luther Strange if I could.
If I could, Luther Strange, basically the same as the other couple that Trump has endorsed him, and he's already in. And I think that Jeff Sessions probably had a bit to his picking and I kind of enjoy Jeff Sessions and what he's done, especially as Attorney General.
So you think that the other 49 states besides our Alabama, Luther Strange is the best person to move our country forward, not just the state of Alabama?
Yes, I do. Okay. Yes, I do.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We're going to talk to a few more people throughout the course of the day, but we have one very important vote still to take, and I believe the folks here know what I'm about to do. Is it Crimson Tide or War Eagle? War Eagle! For those of you wondering, all right.
The War Eagles
For those of you wondering, this is a Crimson Tide restaurant, but the War Eagles have it here, guys.
Ooh, they're owning it this morning, that's for sure.
They're nested. You can hear it.
All right, Todd, thank you very much. We're going to be checking in with Todd live from Prattville, Alabama, all morning.
Pretty revealing. Looks like the endorsement from the president going a long way for Luther Strange. We'll see if it pushes across the top, how it comes out, but from that read, looks interesting.
All right, well, we already knew that cops found no alcohol in Tiger Woods' system. Well, it turns out that wasn't the end of that story.
And is hate speech really protected under the U.S. Constitution? Judge Napolitano, the expert on that document, well, he's here to explain next.
All right, here comes the judge.
Welcome back to Fox and Friends. About 15 minutes now to the top of the hour. Back with some quick headlines. Legendary wrestler Ric Flair is recovering this morning after undergoing surgery in Atlanta. The 68-year-old was put into a medically induced coma before the undisclosed procedure. His reps say it was successful, but he is not out of the woods just yet. We'll keep a close eye on that one. And Tiger Woods was driving under the influence of 5 prescription drugs when Florida police found him asleep behind the wheel back in May. According to a newly released toxicology report, Woods had Vicodin, Dilaudid, Xanax, Ambien, and THC in his system, all of them. Well, Woods told the officer he was taking the medication for back pain. Okay, Pete?
It's a cocktail. Wow. All right, Attorney General Jeff Sessions says the DOJ will pursue charges over violence in Virginia.
It doesn't meet the definition of domestic terrorism in our statute. We are pursuing it with the Department of Justice in every way that we can make a case. You can be sure we will charge and advance the investigation toward the most serious charges that can be brought.
But here's a question. Is the hate speech that inspired the violence protected by our Constitution?
Judge Andrew Napolitano is here to weigh in, and this is what a lot of people are talking about post what happened on Saturday that was so tragic. How far can you go when it comes to free speech?
Well, that's a great question. The short answer is hate speech is protected. Think about it. The speech that we love and that we welcome doesn't require protection because we welcome it. It's the speech that we hate and fear that the Constitution protects. So here's the rule. All harmless speech is protected, and all speech is harmless when there is time. That's the key. Time for more speech to rebut it. So if the person that organized this white supremacy rally stood up and said something incendiary and encouraged the crowd to commit violence, and there is time for someone to challenge what he said, even if no one actually challenges it, there is time for someone to do it, then his speech is protected and he is not criminally liable for the consequences of his speech. We're not talking about the guy that drove the car. That's obviously a crime.
For how much time,
We're just talking about speech.
It's not just, that's interesting, it's not just incitement. It's not just encouragement of violence or of something illegal. So if I was to stand up and say something, hey, go kill that guy, if there's enough time to rebut it, I'm okay?
Yes. And you are not responsible for the person who killed. There's no rule of thumb on how much time, as long as a reasonable person would believe that there's enough time to challenge it. So think of it this way. The only speech that can be prosecuted is successful incitement. If you successfully incite the crowd because there was no time to rebut what you said, then you can be held criminally liable in this hypothetical for what the crowd did.
Is that like hollering fire in a movie theater?
No, hollering fire in a theater is entirely different because that is controlled by the owner of the theater. We're talking about the government now. Right. Remember, the First Amendment only regulates the government. It doesn't regulate what people do on private property. Westboro Baptist Church, you know this. Awful case. The horrific things they say about the military at funerals for guys and women who have given our lives. Supreme Court said accepted accepted speech. Very famous case in Chicago where a priest gave an incendiary speech and the mob destroyed the hall. And the police arrested and prosecuted the priest. Supreme Court threw it out because you can't have the crowd determine what the speaker is allowed to say. So bottom line is, the First Amendment was written to give the broadest, widest, most possible protection to speech, even speech we hate. Because the best remedy for hateful speech is not to suppress it, but to rebut it, to challenge it.
Can you see that ever changing?
I hope not.
Hope not.
I hope not. One of the beauties of our system is that you are free to go right out on that street corner and say whatever you want.
Make a fool of yourself and be discredited in the process.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Well, if Kilmeade were here, he'd give us an example. Only kidding, Brian, only kidding.
Well played.
You know that.
Well, we better get used to it because the organizers of the rally from Saturday say they're going to continue throughout the calendar year.
And they have the right to do it. Wouldn't you rather have hate, as horrible as it is, out in the open so we know where it is and we know who's spewing it and we can challenge what they say rather than having it bubbling beneath the surface? It's going to pop up somewhere.
That's right.
Anyway.
Discredit them in the court of public opinion.
Correct. The remedy for hateful speech is more speech.
Yeah, Judge, that's very well said. Great to have you on this morning.
Thank you. God bless you.
It's an important issue. All right, coming up, protesters toppling Confederate statues in the wake of those Virginia riots. Are they erasing history, or is it about time?
And here we go again. Another NFL player saying he plans to sit through the national anthem this season to make a statement. Baltimore Ravens tight end Benjamin Watson here to react next. Well, that is a shot of Seattle Seahawks defensive end Michael Bennett sitting during the national anthem during a recent preseason game.
Yeah, Bennett said after the game, after the game that he chose to sit because, quote, with everything that's been going on the last couple of months, I just wanted to be able to use my platform to be able to continuously speak on injustice. He also was sitting there eating a banana while doing that.
Well, that was the other guy. That was
the other guy.
Marshawn Lynch with the Oakland Raiders. So this is the second instance we've seen this preseason.
He sat on the cooler. It's interesting because this has been bubbling up ever since Colin Kaepernick of last year. And we were talking with some of the producers during the commercial timeout. And apparently over the last year, a lot of people just don't watch as many football games. Apparently, 23% of those respondents said they're watching fewer football games. And of those 23%, about a quarter of them said it's because of the national anthem protest.
That's right. Ratings went down last year because they want to turn on the television, be entertained, obviously, by a great game, a truly American sport. But they also want, the patriotism we see before the game is something that people sort of brings us together at a moment where you want to be brought together. And this feels like a divisive statement. It's all well within their right as Americans to sit if they want, but I think the flag isn't the problem. The problem may be our politics, it may be divisiveness, whatever it is, but you can still stand and be proud of your country.
And that's what Judge Napolitano just said on our couch. Everyone has the right to say what they want to say, and if they want to sit during the national anthem, they have every right to do that. The question is, does this lead to real progress? Does this lead to real change? Why the reason they're protesting? And I'm not sure that it does. When you think about our national anthem, is this more disrespectful than anything else? Are there other ways to put yourself out there and to try to get attention and to make a difference for the issue that you're speaking out for?
Sure. Yeah. Also think about the owners of these teams. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year to run the National Football League. And then these kinds of protests put their business model in peril because there are some people who say, well, I'm not going to go to the game if they're going to have people who aren't going to stay.
Well, and isn't there enough awareness already of problems in our country? People realize that there are perceived grievances or injustices on both sides. This is not advancing that. I love some of the owners that have come out and said, if you're going to play on my team, you're going to stand for the anthem. They can do that as an owner of a team, just like the league, the NFL, and I've said this before. I would love for them to say, hey, if you're going to play in our league, you're going to stand for the national anthem. We live in a great country. We respect that. They're not going to do that, but I bet there's a lot of folks out there that feel the same way. You play a game for a living. You get to live in the greatest country in the world, and you won't stand up for a national anthem that pays you millions? Come on.
Yeah, I think we're getting to a place where we're losing such respect in this country across the board, whether we're talking about the national anthem or the way we talk about our commander-in-chief, you name it, across the board. We just lost that level of respect, the way that we talk about things, the way that we talk about people. And I think it's just a sad place to be.
Let us know what you think. Email us, friends@foxnews.com. Of course, we're also on Twitter and on Facebook. Meanwhile, Alabama Senator Luther Strange is going to be joining us in about 10 minutes. Corey Lewandowski, who has had the president's ear because he was his campaign manager for a little while. And Laura Ingraham, the radio host, joins us live from New York City.